It's the month of September, lots to discuss, and it all starts right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
It's Labor Day weekend, the start of the new school year, and that also means it's the start of a new season here on Debt Free in 30. And yes, I realize that podcasts don't have seasons. This isn't an old-fashioned sitcom on a TV network, but since I started this podcast back in September of 2014, I've always thought of September as the start of the year and the start of a new season. So welcome to episode number 314, the season premiere of season number 7 here on Debt Free in 30. As is my custom, since I rebroadcast best of shows for the month of August, I use the first episode of the new season to bring you up to date on what's happening and set the stage for the next few months. So today's show will be less than our usual 30 minutes, and it's just me. I've got lots of guests lined up for the coming months, so stay tuned for that. But today, let's talk about where we are at. It's only September, but it's been quite a year already, eh? Last December, in our year-end prediction show, Ted Michaelis predicted that personal insolvency filings in Canada would increase by 10% this year, and I predicted a 20% increase, and for the first 2 months of 2020, my prediction was looking pretty good. In January, personal insolvencies in Ontario were up by 17.5%. February was 16% higher than February of last year, so my prediction was looking pretty good. Then the world changed. We went into lockdown mode. We closed our offices to in-person meetings in the middle of March, and as did pretty much everyone else. So while we were busy the first 2 weeks of March, everything came to a screeching halt thereafter, and as a result, in Ontario for the month of March, personal insolvencies fell by 2%. With the lockdown in full force, personal insolvencies fell in Ontario by 36% in April, 44% in May, 34% in June. So after big increases for the first 2 months, on average for the first 6 months of the year, total consumer insolvencies in Ontario are down by almost 16%, and in all of Canada, it's around 22%. I keep using the term consumer insolvencies, which describes the two debt relief options governed by federal law, consumer proposals and personal bankruptcies. Interestingly, in June, 72% of personal insolvencies filed in Ontario were consumer proposals, slightly lower than the peak in May of around 75%, but still a very high level. So why are more than 7 out of every 10 insolvencies filed consumer proposals? Why are personal bankruptcies less than 3 out of every 10? What's going on? Well, everyone understands the concept behind a bankruptcy. You lose some of your assets, and if your income is higher than the limit allowed by the government, you have to pay more into the pot for your creditors while you're bankrupt. The reason we have more consumer proposals than bankruptcies is because if you are working, or if you have assets, you don't want to take the risk of filing a bankruptcy and potentially lose a portion of your income. With a consumer proposal, we go to your creditors up front and lock in a payment plan, so even if your income increases in the future, your payments in a consumer proposal are fixed. The unemployment rate in Canada is very high, over 10%, the highest level since the early 1980s. So why are so many people trying to protect their income by filing a consumer proposal instead of a bankruptcy? If unemployment is high, shouldn't consumer proposal filings be low? Well, there are 2 explanations for this apparent anomaly. First, obviously, in absolute numbers, there are fewer people filing. But it's also true that many people are still working, and those are the people who are filing a consumer proposal. When you dig a bit deeper into what's actually happening, you realize that there are 2 sets of people. The first group is those people whose jobs have been crushed by the lockdown. Even now, as the economy reopens, many people who work in customer-facing businesses are either not back to work yet or back to work but with reduced hours. For example, fitness clubs have started to reopen, but they're operating at half capacity or less. So that workout class you go to that used to have 20 people in it now only has 10 to promote physical distancing. That means the instructor's probably only getting paid half as much unless they're leading twice as many classes. Same with the place you get your hair cut. I've never had my hair colored, so I don't really understand how it works, but my understanding is that they put the color in your hair, and for some reason you have to put tinfoil in your hair, I'm not really sure why, and then you sit there for a while and then they take it out. Before the virus, you could sit there while the hairstylist cut someone else's hair, so they had 2 customers in the shop at once. Not anymore. They have to minimize the number of customers in the shop at any one time, so it's much more difficult to be doubling up and serving 2 clients at once. The chairs are spaced out, fewer customers at a time, so I suspect that unless a hairstylist increases their hours, they'll see a big drop in income. Restaurants, same thing, because the weather is still decent, many of them are operating outdoor patios, But for most of them, the outdoor patio area is a lot smaller than the indoor area, so again, many of them are operating at much less than 50% capacity. There are lots of other businesses with dramatically reduced volume due to the virus. Anything to do with tourism. Vacation travel is way down, and business meetings are now done by Zoom video, so any job in tourism is either gone or significantly reduced, and there are a lot of jobs in tourism. Hotels, trade shows, conventions, tour companies, tour buses, limos and taxis, airlines, airport workers. The entertainment industry has also been hit hard, and in places like Toronto, it's a huge industry. Events, concerts, TV and movie production, festivals, theaters, the Stratford Festival, Shaw Festival, completely shut down. Nightclubs, bars, many have shut down. And of course, anything with large gatherings are also suspended. Weddings, funerals, graduations. And what about school? Well, there won't be any big lecture halls open at any of the universities. Most post-secondary education will be conducted remotely, so if you have virtually no students on campus, you need a lot fewer support workers like janitors and food service workers. That's why we have massive unemployment. And finally, immigration, which has been responsible for all of our population growth over the last few years, has been greatly reduced. Our borders are somewhat closed, so that reduces immigration. And of course, if unemployment is high, there are no jobs to immigrate here to do. So immigration service employment is way down. I see it here at my office in Kitchener. We share a building with the YMCA that provides services to new immigrants, and they've been completely shut down since March. And of course, reduced immigration will impact the real estate market, but let me stay on point here. The point is that some businesses are closed and those that are open are at lower capacity, which is why fewer employees need to file a consumer proposal or personal bankruptcy to protect their income. They don't have as much income to protect. But there is another side to this, and that's this. A not insignificant portion of the population is actually better off as a result of the lockdown. Who? Well, people who have jobs where they can work from home, and that's primarily office workers. Anyone who's visited the downtown core in Toronto in the last few months will tell you that, since March, the financial district has become a ghost town. The office towers are largely empty. Most of those workers, instead of sitting in front of their computer in their cubicle in the office, are sitting in front of their computer working from home. Financially, many of those workers are big winners. Many of them are still getting their same paycheck, but for the last few months, they haven't had to pay for parking or transit fare or lunch in the food zoo in the bowels of their skyscraper. Everyone working from home puts on a clean shirt for their Zoom meetings, but very few people are wearing a suit or a tie or even pants. With retail stores operating at reduced capacity and with no need for a new suit, purchases of clothing for the office are way down. And with the kids at home, no daycare costs other than whatever you had to buy to keep your kids occupied since school closed now. So if you are still getting your full paycheck working from home and your expenses are lower, you've managed to significantly improve your cash flow, and that's led to an interesting result. The household savings rate, which was under 2% back in 2018, grew to 7% in the first quarter and then exploded up to 28% at the end of June. Those Canadians who were still working but had lower expenses were able to dramatically increase their savings rate. Now, before we get too excited, that's not all good news for two reasons. First, we save more when we're worried about the future. I may still have my job, but if I'm worried about losing it, if I can, I save more money to prepare for an uncertain future. Second, one of the reasons we're saving more is because we've deferred our debt payments. According to TransUnion's second quarter Industry Insights report, over 9% of Canadians, or 2.5 million people, took advantage of loan deferrals as of the end of June 2020. As of June 30th, 750,000 Canadians had deferred at least one payment on their mortgage. More scary is that 1/3 of all accounts in deferral were credit cards as of May 2020. And as of June 30th, the biggest 8 banks had processed close to 500,000 requests for credit card payment deferrals. TransUnion's July Financial Hardship Survey reported that 62% of those surveyed continue to be concerned with their ability to pay current bills, and with credit cards being the most likely to cause problems. Now, obviously, if you aren't working, you don't have the cash coming in to pay your mortgage, so getting a deferral makes sense. But I'm sure there are people out there who are working but requested the mortgage deferral anyways. perhaps to give themselves a cushion in case they do lose their job, or perhaps because they just wanted access to extra cash. So the increase in the savings rate is partially due to us doing a better job of managing our cash, but some of it is also due to deferring our debt payments, which is just postponing the day of reckoning, not fixing the underlying problem of too much debt. And, of course, in some cases, if you have extra cash, you spend it. According to Statistics Canada, after a big drop in March and April, retail sales were up almost 24% in June, which is actually 1.3% higher than they were in February before the pandemic. I don't have hard data on this, but I've spoken to many clients over the last month or two, not economists, but actual workers, and the people who work in places that sell anything for the home are very busy. Makes sense. I'm stuck at home. I might as well fix up the place. Car sales have bounced back, and in fact, the big problem the new car dealers are having is not lack of customers, it's a lack of supply of new vehicles. If we're all working from home, why are car sales up? Well, my guess is that as we return to work, we'll want to avoid public transit, so we may be more likely to drive, so we want a reliable car. And we aren't flying anywhere on vacation, so we're more likely to travel within the province, perhaps up north to a cottage, so again, you want a reliable car. Here's my point. There have been winners and losers during the pandemic. Many people are a lot worse off, some are better off, and that's reflected in the stats. My guess is that as more people return to work, more people will realize they have more debt than they can handle, and that will become even more apparent as the deferral periods end. And debt problems will become more apparent as collection activity increases. Collection agents are still working, but many of them are working remotely, so they weren't able to make as many calls last month as they did 6 or 7 months ago, but that's changing. CRA stopped collecting over the summer, but again, they'll be resuming collection efforts in the fall, and with the courts reopening, collection activity will increase. So, while the number of people filing consumer proposals and bankruptcies is down a lot, those numbers will gradually increase over the coming months. The big unknown is what happens when schools reopen in September. Obviously, the number of new COVID cases will go up in September as more people are interacting with others outside of their homes. But how many new cases will there be? How serious will it be? Will it be young people who get mild cases and quickly recover, or will it be more serious? No one knows, so we won't have a good idea of what the future holds until we get through September. If the economy continues to reopen, people will have more income to service their debts, and that's good, but it also means they become vulnerable to wage garnishments if they are working but can't pay, so I expect insolvency filings to gradually increase over the coming months. CERB is ending. There's a new EI system in place. Will that be enough to help people? Time will tell. I will say this. I am an optimist. The situation today looks bleak. The virus is still here and around the world, and the problems we had before the pandemic are also still here. Debt levels are still at record highs, and while debt levels are not top of mind during a pandemic, that problem still exists. So why am I an optimist? Because the human race is undefeated. In our entire history, nothing has wiped us out. We're still here, and if past history is any indication, just like we defeated every other pandemic in the past, we'll defeat this one. But there's another reason I'm an optimist. The pandemic and the lockdown has given us the opportunity for a reset, a reboot. If you have an okay job, you don't want to quit your job and start a new career because it's too risky. But if you get laid off and have no choice, you start a new career. Sometimes we need a jolt. The big bad virus is that jolt. We learned some stuff. We learned that Canada, a country of almost 38 million people, can't make enough N95 masks to protect its people. We found out we don't make a lot of stuff, so when the world economy shuts down, we've got a really big problem. Perhaps one of the impacts of the lockdown is that we will start making stuff again. That's good for us because we won't be vulnerable to a future disruption in the supply chain, but there's a bigger benefit. Supply chain is a term used by academics. The real impact is felt by people. I've talked a lot on this show about the lack of good jobs, particularly for young people just starting out. We tell them to rack up a lot of student loan debt, and then they end up in the gig economy working 2 jobs in the service industry just to survive. Imagine what would happen if we started making stuff again. That may solve the underemployment problem and the student loan problem. That may be the biggest benefit of the unfortunate events of 2020. Just a thought. So, starting next week, I'll be bringing guests back to the studio to share their thoughts and lots of practical advice. Next week, Ted Michaelis returns, and I'll ask him what he thinks the future holds, and I'll ask him for his advice on navigating these uncertain times. We all want to earn extra income, so the temptation, particularly if you're stuck at home, is to look for a side hustle, and guess what? What's old is new again. Multi-level marketing businesses are back in full force, so I've asked Julie Wildman to make a return visit to give her thoughts on how to avoid getting burned by a strategy that may be too good to be true. I've got lots more plans, so stay tuned, and if you're subscribed to the Debt Free in 30 channel on YouTube, you may have noticed that we now post shorter explainer videos. These are 3 to 5 minute videos featuring our Hoyes Michaelis experts like Diane Cunha, who's a certified credit counselor and frequent guest here, Ted Michaelis, and me. We provide explanations of common financial concepts in simple terms, again, in our efforts to keep you informed. Check them out and subscribe so you don't miss any. And if you're on Twitter and have a comment or a suggestion for a future show, track me down at Doug Hoyes. We live in interesting times, and this season will be the most interesting ever, so fasten your seatbelts, and thanks for subscribing. Those are my thoughts for today. Tune in next week for comments and practical advice from Ted Michaelis. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.